Welcome to the Settlement Pros Podcast. Here's your host, Jack Meligan.
Welcome to the Settlement Pros Podcast with today's guest, trial lawyer, Rob Beatty-Walters. Welcome, Rob.
Thanks, Jack.
Nice to have you. My name is Jack Meligan. I've spent over 30 years as a settlement planner, pre-mediation consultant, and financial advisor. I interview the best trial lawyers in the United States and the settlement experts across the country to uncover their true stories. My goal is to weed out the toxic waste, the pretenders, and the scumbags so that you can avoid them. And I'm looking to connect you with the very best in the business. These are the settlement pros. And I want to help you avoid the settlement cons. So what's a settlement pro? A settlement pro is an attorney who is not afraid to go into the arena. The arena is the courtroom. Attorneys who go into the courtroom and fight on behalf of clients, win or lose, are the attorneys that you want to call when you need a personal injury trial lawyer. They are the most effective attorneys in the country. Attorneys that don't try cases, who won't go into the arena, that's how you get hurt. So attorneys who will step into that arena have nothing to hide. And as we've heard from the old saying, the credit belongs to those who are actually in the arena, whose face is marred with dust and sweat and blood. Let's begin. So, Rob, once again, thanks for joining me today on this podcast. I'm really looking forward to our discussion and getting to know you. And of course, I've known you, I guess, probably since you got into the business up here. But you know, I like to start off with
years, I think.
Yeah, at least. So I like to start off with a confession, and the one that I've been using is my confession is that I really wanted to be a professional baseball player, but some people can't hit the curveball. When I got to college, I found out I couldn't hit the curveball, and I wasn't hitting the fastball all that well either. So what's your true confession? Did you ever want to be a Jedi or a fireman, or what's a true confession from Rob Beatty-Walters?
My true confession is I always wanted to be a trial lawyer.
Always.
It took me a while to do that. I kind of went a circuitous route, but I wanted to be in the courtroom. I went the wrong direction. It sort of helped me in the long run, but I went the wrong direction and got back on the path a little bit late as things go. But that's what I've always wanted to do, is be a lawyer.
So at what age were you when you decided that that you wanted to be a lawyer?
This is an interesting story, but I was in the 7th grade. And what happened was the school where I went to middle school sent home the rule book for the district, the school district.
Yeah.
And I read it. I read all the rules. And
that's a budding lawyer right there.
And so I actually was late to class between my gym class and whatever class came after that. And the new vice principal in the school where I went was a bit of a disciplinarian. And I got this, they had these infraction cards, and I got an infraction card for being late to my class. And I showed up in the vice principal's office, and he says, all right, well, the penalty for being late to class is 2 licks. And this was back in the 70s. And at the time, my dad was a psychology professor at one of the universities close to where I went to school. And he didn't believe in corporal punishment and told me that if anything ever came up, you can tell them that your parents just don't believe in it and they'll have to think of an alternative punishment. And so I tell the vice principal at the time, I said, sorry, that's not going to work because my dad said he doesn't believe in it and I'm up with that. And so he says, all right, well then you have to stay after school and clean up the playground. And I said, no, can't do that either because it's right here in the handbook. You cannot require students to do manual labor.
Ah, that's great.
So I ended up being suspended from school for 2 days because I was late to my class.
Wow.
But from then on, I knew that I was destined to be a lawyer, reading
Yeah.
the rule book, and I'm still sort of a rules kind of guy.
So Dad must have been proud, even though you missed 2 days of school.
Well, in one way, yes. In another, I think, yes, I think he was. I honestly say that.
So, what part of the country were you in at this time? Where did you go to school?
This was McLean Middle School in Fort Worth, Texas.
And is that where you were born?
I was born in Albuquerque, New Mexico. Lived there for a couple of years, and then we moved around a little bit. Finally, ended up in the Dallas-Fort Worth area. Been back to New Mexico when I was about 15 or so.
Okay, so you finished high school in New Mexico?
Yep, finished high school in New Mexico. I went my first 2 years at a private school in Santa Fe, St. Michael's High School, and then moved to Hobbs, New Mexico. They call it Hobbs America. Probably most famous for its basketball teams and its basketball coaches. One of the winningest high school basketball coaches in the country. So, yeah, so I graduated from Hobbs High School.
So you guys lived in Santa Fe for a couple of years?
We did.
How was that?
Great town. Learned to ski. Learned to drive. Yeah, it's a great little town. Surprisingly, people don't realize it, but it's a pretty high altitude city. It's Denver's the mile high city, but Santa Fe is about 800 feet higher than Denver, almost 6,000 feet.
I've been there one time for a couple of days for a conference, and got to explore around afterwards. I didn't make it up. I think it was north maybe to where a lot of the Native American ruins and so forth are located. Is that right? Do I have that right geographically? Are they north of Santa Fe?
Yeah, they're north and west. A place called Chaco Canyon, which is real close to the border between, they call it Four Corners, Colorado, New Mexico, Arizona.
Chaco Canyon, that's right.
Chaco
Pretty famous.
Canyon and Utah at that corner.
And there's a big sort of a walled cliff.
That's right. The
back there.
Anasazis.
The Anasazis, who, as I know about it, disappeared all of a sudden, it sounds like.
That's right. That's right. And I don't know if that mystery's ever been solved, but they did. They just sort of disappeared.
So after Santa Fe, you go back to, you went to Hobbs?
Yeah, we went to Hobbs and lived there for a couple of years, and that's where I went to nursing school. I got my nursing degree at New Mexico Junior College in Hobbs, and finished nursing school and did my first year of nursing school and my senior year in high school at the same time. So graduated from nursing school a year after I graduated from high school.
So you're one of those guys that's going to college even though you're still trying to finish senior year in high school, which probably wasn't all that hard for you. So fraction. How did that happen that you decided to get into nursing?
Well, it's part of the same story of how my delay in becoming a lawyer. I remember talking with my dad and my stepmom at the time, and I said, I really would like to be a lawyer, maybe a doctor, but I'd like to be a lawyer. And my dad and my stepmom really only heard doctor. And at the time, my stepmom was actually starting nursing school, and they had this program at the junior college where if you had enough high school credits, you could take some college credits, and then once you graduated from high school, you'd actually get them. It's like you take them in advance of graduation, and then when you graduate from high school, you get the credits. So
Right.
My mom was starting into nursing school, and she said, well, why don't you do nursing? That way you can kind of figure out whether you like it. And so I went to nursing school with my stepmom. We graduated together, actually.
Wow.
Yeah.
So how old were you when you came out of nursing school?
Well, I graduated in mid-May, and I turned 19 at the end of May. So technically I was 18 years old when I graduated from nursing school. Then I took my boards that summer and became a registered nurse in September. So I was 19 when I became a registered nurse.
Wow. A registered nurse before the age of 20.
Yep.
That's amazing. Now, I mean, how many people can say that?
I don't think there are very many, and these days it's hard to become an RN with a 2-year degree. There are some schools that still let you get an associate's degree and become an RN, but most of them have a significant number of prerequisites where you can't really do it in 2 years. Back then, you could do it in 2 years and still be a registered nurse, but not so much anymore.
So you were, so how long did you actually work in the medical field?
Well, I only did it for a few years, early after graduating. I worked emergency room, and then I worked pediatrics and actually in a newborn nursery. And then
The NICU.
I did that for about 3 years, and then I went to work as a restaurant manager. I decided I didn't want to do nursing anymore.
And what, and so where was this when you graduated, and then your first job as a nurse was where?
Well, I actually worked in the emergency room at the hospital next to my nursing school, worked there. And then when I graduated, I went to work in El Paso, moved to El Paso, Texas, which most people, some people don't know that El Paso is really squeezed in between Mexico and New Mexico. So it's really close to the border between New Mexico and Texas. And so I went to work at a hospital in the emergency room and did that for a little while, and decided I wanted to work with kids. So I went and worked in the pediatric unit and then the newborn nursery. And that's really kind of a hard job, especially for somebody at that age. I think there's a lot more to it than you realize. Seeing sick kids was something that I had a hard time with. And
Yeah, I bet.
And so a friend of mine had a restaurant business and asked me to come work with him. And I became a restaurant manager and did that for about 8 years.
8 years in the restaurant business.
In El Paso,
Wow.
Texas.
Well, I had some restaurant work in my early career. I think I started at age 15 washing dishes. And then in college down in Scottsdale, I bussed tables and bar backed in a restaurant in northern Scottsdale. That's it's an interesting line of work.
I think it's good work. I'm going to encourage both my kids to get into it. It teaches you a couple more than a couple, but some good things about working with people, efficiency, organization. When you become a manager, I mean, a restaurant is, you know, you learn about profit and loss statements, you learn about labor costs and inventories and food costs and regulations and, you know, how to make a break-even point so that you can, you know how much you need to make in terms of your income to keep the business afloat, and how to manage people. Great job, I think.
Yeah, tough business because so much of the profit can just kind of walk out the door, the back door.
Yes, it can. In odd ways. I mean, you as a busboy, you know that if you throw out the silverware, you got to buy new silverware. So
Yes,
you can do that. But I think I learned enough there and decided I really wanted to go back to law school. So since I had a 2-year degree, I had to go back to get an undergrad degree. And that's when I went back to nursing, because restaurant business is great, but you can work part-time as a nurse and make a bit more money and use that sort of to finance. I use that to finance my education. So I went back to nursing.
You went back to nursing part-time and to finish your 4-year degree at what college? What university?
University of Texas, El Paso.
All right.
Yeah.
UTEP.
UTEP, got a degree in history with a minor in French, and worked in the NICU while I was there until I moved to Oregon. Moved to Oregon in 1992 to go to law school at the University of Oregon, and then continued working as a nurse in Eugene while I was in law school. I did have the NICU.
Yeah, we just had some contact with the NICU, as we call it, out here at Providence St. V's. Our oldest daughter gave birth on April 11th, right in the middle of this COVID crisis. And she had a little issue. So little Aaron was born 8 weeks premature.
How big was he?
Ended up in the NICU for 3 and then in a private room for the next 6. He just got out 8 days ago.
Wow. How's he doing?
Seems to be doing really, really well.
Is he growing?
He's been growing. He started off at about 4 pounds, 4 ounces. And when they let him out the other day, I think he was about 7.5, quite long.
Good. Good.
You know, they had a few issues. He had a feeding tube for a while, and they got him off of that. And he had some issues with breathing. Mm. They referred to it as Brady something.
Bradycardia. Usually,
yeah, bradycardia.
Sometimes the heart rate will drop down, and sometimes they give the babies caffeine just to help with that, and it works.
Yeah. So in this case, they said little Aaron was forgetting to breathe, and they started training him where they would rub his head or his back, and it would be a signal to him that he needed to breathe. And now everything's fine. So
good.
But yeah, the NICU unit, we really appreciate what those people did.
It's great work. That's the only thing I miss about nursing is working with. Well, I miss working with babies. That was really rewarding. I mean, most of the time they do pretty well, and the technology has improved so much that babies can live and have fewer and fewer complications because of new technology, and it's a really rewarding field. I miss working with babies. I don't miss so much working in hospitals, but especially not now.
Yeah, no kidding. So I'm going to go back a little bit. Growing up, did you have any brothers and sisters?
I have 2 sisters, one younger and one older. My older sister is really close in age to me. She's just a year older than me, and so we're pretty close. My little sister and I are pretty close. She still lives in New Mexico.
And so are you a little more than a year from your older sister or a little less than a year? Because, it makes a difference.
It does. Actually, I'm exactly 1 year, 1 month, 1 week, and 1 day younger than her.
Wow. Makes it easy to remember her birthday.
Yeah, no, yeah, it does.
So what does she do?
She is she runs a nonprofit in Eugene that works with trauma victims, people who have been injured in some sort of trauma, sometimes brain, sometimes other parts, sometimes emotional trauma. It's a group called the Trauma Healing Project, and that's what she does.
Wow. And your younger sis?
She's a farmer. She and her husband are pecan farmers.
Oh, wow.
Yeah, and my
Nice.
2 nephews, one of them is an engineer. The other one is a farmer and doing pecans. I have no short supply of pecans, and we get a package every year with bags of fresh pecans from southern New Mexico. And
Well, that's cool. So, were you into any clubs or sports growing up?
I was a baseball player.
All right.
Until I got to high school, and then I realized, because I'm not that big, you can't see me on this video, but I started doing gymnastics when I started high school, and spent my high school years as a gymnast, and actually got a scholarship to the school where I went to nursing school, which was national champions in gymnastics. But I couldn't do nursing school and gymnastics. Just couldn't do them both. They weren't compatible. So I had to make a decision. And so instead of doing gymnastics, I opted for the more practical option.
So, let me guess, were you a second baseman in baseball?
How did you know that?
Well, I played a long time. That's
Yeah, I was.
there's just certain positions where you stick certain kids.
Yeah.
And second base usually got your short guy.
Yep. And if I wasn't playing second base, I was catching.
And I caught. And I remember at the time, a lot of people thought 6'2" catchers were kind of big for the position.
Yeah, they were too.
They
big.
wanted to stick me at first base or third base. I liked playing third too, but I didn't play much of it. But after being a catcher, it translated well to third because you weren't afraid of taking a shot off of your chest if you had to.
That hot corner.
Yeah.
You'll get them, especially if you're playing up.
Yeah. So, you mentioned a stepmom. Did you have any hardships growing up? You mentioned a stepmom and a dad that was a psychologist or psychiatrist.
He was a psychologist. He actually ended up going to medical school at one point and got a medical degree. That's kind of a long story, but I had a there's some weird things that happened in my childhood. My dad was divorced when I was 10, and I don't know if that went well, but I ended up living with my dad, which was probably a good move. It wasn't all bad. Typical middle class.
Well, divorce is that's a tough thing. Thankfully, I've never gone through it, but in this day and age, we know the statistics in the United States are 50% maybe even slightly higher if all marriages end in divorce. And in our business, in our industry, the one that you and I are in, we've noticed after 30 years of doing this that the divorce rate amongst our clients is above 90.
Yeah, it's pretty high. That's one of the things that I saw in the NICU as well. When kids were born with severe disabilities, the divorce rate of parents with disabilities is really high, in that 90% range as well.
Yeah.
But both my sisters are with long-term partners, and I've been married almost 25 years, and so we've figured out how to break that cycle, my sisters and I.
That's good. That's good. Having watched some of my friends go through it and seen what it's done to their kids, it's pretty hard on the kids, that's for sure, or it can be. So, what were your friends like growing up? Who'd you hang out with? Do you stay in touch with anybody? Remember anybody in particular?
I have some really good friends from just after high school. Most of my high school friends, I having only gone to that school for 2 years, I didn't end up with any really long-term friends. But when I moved to El Paso, I met a couple guys, one of whom lives in Seattle now, and another who lives in Austin, Texas, who've been my friends since I was 19. And we still, once in a while get together as a group and usually spend a few days golfing somewhere. Sometimes Vegas, sometimes Southern California, sometimes we go back to New Mexico, but we try to get together every once in a while. It's been a couple of years since we've been together, but yeah, those two guys are some of my best friends. And I've got friends from law school too, in Oregon. But yeah.
So any interesting or funny stories from college or law school?
Here's a good story. So living on the border, El Paso, it's right next to a Mexican city called Juarez, which was actually, if you know the history, was actually called El Paso before the early 1900s, when it changed its name to Juarez. And the city across the border in the United States was called Franklin City. El Paso was Franklin City. And when El Paso, Mexico changed its name to Juarez, Franklin City took the name El Paso.
I did not know that.
Yeah. And that was somewhere around 1910, something like that.
Wow.
Right during the Mexican Revolution.
Yes.
And but when you live on the border, first of all, you could go to the bars when you were 18 in Texas at the time, when I was 18. And then it changed to 19. But you could go to Mexico across the border when you were 16, 15, 16, you could get into the bars. And so we would go across the river to Mexico once in a while. And one of my best friends, who's now the one that lives in Seattle, had this early 60s Impala. It was a two-door Impala. And that's kind of a desirable vehicle.
Yes, it is.
I think it was a 64. Anyway, somebody stole that car. And
so you guys ended up stranded in Juarez? Or did you have to walk back across?
So the car got stolen from El Paso, Texas. And one day we were over across the river doing what we were doing. And my friend Eric still had the key to that car on his key ring. And we're walking down this street, probably 1 or 2 in the morning, and there's Eric's car a year later after it got stolen. And Eric still had the key. We jumped in that car, started it up, back across the border. We had his car back.
That's great. That is great.
That was, these days you don't want to go to Juarez, Mexico. It's not safe. Since I've left El Paso, a lot has changed on that border. A lot of.
Yeah, I've been in and out of El Paso in the last 3-4 years. In particular, I had a very large trucking accident case down there, and my client was from Mexico.
Yeah.
And part of the issue we had in the case was his wife was a professor in Mexico, but we were having trouble getting her over here. And they had 2 little girls. And she had to be deposed and brought across a couple of times. And they, I know it was a big issue to send somebody in there to find her and bring her over, or meet her and bring her over from Juarez. And at the time, yeah, I was told it was an issue because it's very dangerous.
Yep.
So thankfully we've got them all now across, and they're doing quite well. But I've been in and out of El Paso and downtown a few times, and got introduced to some really good guac at one of the Mexican restaurants between downtown and the airport. Trial attorney in El Paso turned me onto it, and I ordered some to go and took it on the airplane with me. It was really good.
Did they make it at the table?
They made it before I got there and had it ready to go, but I guess, it is a table-made guac. But I learned to make it in Scottsdale when I was in college, and I like my own really well, but this was really good stuff. So, yeah.
I'm partial to my own recipes.
People who are into guac usually are.
Yep.
Oh, well, that's an interesting story. So, all right. So you get out of high school and you got 1 year left. You become a nurse. You're a nurse for a couple of years, and then you go back to college. But you're also in the restaurant business for 8 years. And then from there, you go back into nursing because you want to finish your undergrad or your college degree and then go to law school. So you come out of UTEP with your 4-year degree in history, and did you say a minor in French?
Correct.
Wow. And then what got you to Eugene from there?
My older sister.
She was already there.
Yeah, she came to Eugene in the early 80s to go to school at U of O, and she's got a master's degree in public policy and planning from there. And I had been to Eugene a few times to visit her, and really liked the town. It was comfortable, and people were relaxed, and it was a good place, I thought. So I got into U of O and started in the fall of 1992 in Eugene. Happy to be in Eugene. Great little town.
Yeah, Eugene's nice, and lots of nice people down there. It's a different vibe than the Portland area, I think.
Yeah. It was a change in weather more than anything. I mean, I remember walking out of my apartment to go to school and having to turn around and change clothes because I was wearing my shorts, which is what I would have been wearing if I was still in El Paso. But,
yeah, I bet. So did you make it through law school in 3 years?
Yep. Yeah, I finished May of 1995. I worked in the NICU the whole time I was there, and then I spent another year in Eugene while my then fiance finished law school. She was a year behind me in law school, and so I stayed and clerked for a year for Lyle Velour.
Oh, yes. So, yeah, you clerked for Judge Velour. I'd forgotten about that.
I did.
That is probably when we may have had our paths cross the first time, because I remember being down in one of those conference rooms at a mediation with the Hammer, Judge Velour.
That's right. I'm sure, because we did a couple of mediations a week, and over a year, I got to see mediations from the inside on both sides, because I'd go from one room to the other.
Yeah,
that was a great education.
Oh man. Yeah, and there's a reason they call him the Hammer. I mean, after a few times of seeing his MO, I got to kind of anticipate what was going to happen when the door would fly open and he would bust in like a bigger, stronger version of Kramer from Seinfeld. Oh man.
He was not subtle.
No, he was not. And then in between talking to the plaintiffs in our room and the defendants in the other, occasionally I'd end up outside the room looking for something, to drink or eat or wash my hands somewhere. And I'd happen to drive by his office or walk by his office, and I could hear him in there on the phone talking to somebody about the Ducks or golf.
Right. Yeah.
Or maybe he's talking to somebody about another case, but man, he was multitasking like crazy.
That was him.
Judge Velour, that's quite the deal. So once you were done clerking for him, then what happened? Where'd you go?
Well, I got married, and before that, we moved to Portland, and my wife was studying for the bar in the summer of '96, and I started work for a firm called Hallmark Keating and Abbott, which is now called Keating Jones, and went to work defending medical malpractice cases for doctors and hospitals. Started in summer of '96 working for that firm, and spent about 5.5 years there learning. Tried my first malpractice case, tried my first any case, which at the time was somewhat unusual, getting to try a case, especially a malpractice case.
Right.
It takes a few more years, I think, now to get into the courtroom to try cases on the defense side, which is another interesting subject. But so that's what I did. I went and worked for them.
So how did you like that side of the street? I mean, you didn't know the other side yet, but what were your feelings and impressions?
One of the things that I learned from Judge Velour, and I took it to heart. He told me, you don't represent a cause, you represent a client. And so when you represent a cause, you try to pick your clients based on whether or not they fit within your cause. But when you represent a client, you take their cause, and it's one thing to be a cause lawyer and another thing to be a client's lawyer. And so I took that to heart, and I represented my clients, and we have an ethical obligation under the rules to represent our clients zealously. It's required. And I took that obligation seriously, and I enjoyed doing it. And I tried the one thing I didn't like, and probably the main reason I'm not a defense lawyer anymore, is because you work for insurance companies. Even though you're representing a client, the insurance company is the one who's paying your bills.
Yeah, they're the ones that call you first.
and they're the ones that decide which clients you get. So you don't get to pick your clients. The insurance company picks your clients for you, and you either do the work the insurance company wants you to do, or you don't work for that insurance company. And so you didn't really have a lot of choice. But I enjoyed working for the clients. And particularly, I met a lot of really interesting people. And Keating Jones, I think, is one of the best malpractice firms on the defense side. And I learned a lot about how to organize cases and how to think about cases from the defense side. And to this day, my perspective on cases starts out with, okay, what's the defense? How is this going to be defended? How easy is it to defend this case? And so I learned to look at cases from how they're going to be defended to kind of inform whether or not a case makes sense to bring forward.
And that is hugely valuable.
Yeah.
That's one thing that I think I've seen too, is that I've had the pleasure and the honor of working with some top med mal plaintiff attorneys. But I have to say the ones that had experience on the defense side, I think they've got an advantage. I mean, they know it from that side of the table, and like you say, they approach it from the defense. How's this case going to be defended? What are they going to say to defend this doctor or this hospital? And how effective is that going to be? I think attorneys that haven't had that experience can acquire that kind of an approach, but we all know that on-the-job training is really the most effective training. And if you've actually been there for a few years and how insurance companies think and how their committees think when they're trying to decide whether to have you defend a case or go ahead and settle it, that's valuable stuff.
I think so too. I think especially young lawyers, you want your case to be a good case. And so when you're talking about what the case is about, you sort of put aside and dismiss the defenses and then after you try a case, especially from the plaintiff side, those little things that are sort of sitting there as kind of little issues become big issues. And so it really helps to be able to think about it from that perspective early on, so that you can, if it's a minor issue, you can learn to sort of avoid it, or turn it into an asset sometimes. But I've been talking to a young lawyer recently about a case that he's interested in having me help him with. And he's got all these good arguments for why it's a great case, but he's not looking at the defense side. What's the defense arguments? And the defense arguments are pretty compelling. And to the point where I think fatal to bringing the case. And it's hard to see that because you get invested. You want your case to be a good case. You want to help your client. And so if you don't look at that stuff, you may end up on the losing end. Oftentimes you are on a losing end if you don't think about the defenses. So it really helps.
Yeah, I bet.
To be able to think of them from that perspective.
Great approach. So where did, the Hallmark Keating firm, excellent firm, by reputation and results. So where did you end up after that initial experience?
Well, I think the first malpractice case I tried, I co-counseled with another lawyer who was I was defending the hospital, and another lawyer was defending the surgeon. It was a surgical malpractice case. And that was Dave Miller. Dave Miller represented the physician, and I represented the hospital. We tried it together. And I really enjoyed working with Dave, and I kind of knew that I didn't want to be on the defense side. And there were some things that happened, mostly with insurance companies, that solidified my feeling that I wasn't long for the defense world. Um, I was about that point in my career where, okay, the next couple of steps, I'm going to be a partner in this firm, and then I'm stuck. And so,
Right.
uh, so I decided to jump ship before that came to be, and so I called Dave up and I said, Dave, in the meantime had left his firm with Bob Wagner and started a little plaintiff's firm called Miller and Wagner. And so I called Dave. I said, Dave, I really want to do plaintiff's work, and I think you could use me. And Dave said, yep, come work with me.
Get over here, huh?
Yep. And so I spent about 6 years working with Dave and Bob, bringing plaintiffs' cases. Tried my first couple of cases for plaintiffs, malpractice cases, and really liked doing it. And then learned a lot working with Dave. Dave is a great lawyer, really one of the smartest guys I know. And Bob Wagner is just a delightful guy to work with. And had a really good time working with those guys.
Yeah, they're good guys. Good guys and good attorneys. And yeah, I bet you had a good time over there. I mean, Wagner's got that sardonic sense of humor. He's always fun to hang out with. And Dave's one of the nicest guys on the planet.
Yep.
And a whip smart attorney.
He's a really good lawyer.
Yeah.
I learned a lot from Dave. Still to this day, Dave and I are friends, and we talk a lot about cases, and I sometimes lean on him for guidance even to this day. Just a wonderful person.
Yeah, it's a valuable resource to have guys like that you can call and bounce stuff off of just to check. That's pretty cool. So then what year did you bounce out and start your own firm?
Well, 2007, I tried a very difficult malpractice case, and against John Hart. It was a baby case. Really took a lot out of me. It was a hard case, and it was. I think my son was born in February, and I tried that case in July of 2007. So when my son was 4 or 5 months old, and it was about the death of a baby, and I remember I left nursing because I didn't really do well with the emotional part about dealing with sick kids. And that case was really a hard case just because of the timing. And I decided after trying that case that I didn't want to do this for anybody else. If I'm going to do this, if I'm going to invest this much time and effort, I wanted to be either a partner in the endeavor or do it on my own. And Dave and Bob had decided when they left their big firm that they were not going to ever have any more partners. And I tried to convince them otherwise, and they ended up sticking to their guns and decided they didn't want any more partners. And they didn't want me to leave, but I didn't want to be an employee. I wanted to work for myself, and wanted to decide which cases I take and which clients I work with. And so we decided, yep, I'm going to go out on my own. And Dave and Bob gave me a list of cases that I could take with me to get me started, and helped me with a financial incentive. They wrote me a big check actually on the way out the door to help me get started. And it made a lot of difference. It really, and to this day, as I said, they've been very helpful.
great guys.
Yeah.
That's
Yeah.
not a story you hear very often. It's usually the opposite. It's kind of like a bad breakup,
Oh,
hard
no,
feelings, and
no, this was not that. They let me take cases that were their cases. I ran with them. We transitioned out, and they were really wonderful.
so as we're talking here, you've mentioned trying cases, which is one of the prerequisites in my book for a settlement pro. You don't become a settlement pro unless you've got the reputation of trying cases. And as I like to tell the audience every week, it's not that I'm going to present attorneys who have never lost, because I don't know that exists.
Only in the fictional world of Perry Mason.
Yes, only in the fictional world. And as I've told several people who have asked me for attorney referrals over the years, it's the attorneys that go in the courtroom that are most dangerous to the defendants on the other side, and especially attorneys that have lost, because the other side knows that you're going to go in there and you're going to take your best swing at this case, and if you lose, you lose, but you're not afraid to lose. And that's what makes you such a force to be reckoned with, and so dangerous to the defendants. They know you'll go and meet them in there, and it may be a knockdown, drag out, and you may be very persuasive to the jury on the story of your client and what actually happened in the case. And that's really, from my perspective in these, it's what generates the respect that you get and the results that you get. And the results that guys like you that go into the courtroom get are way far above attorneys that as we know, that don't go into the courtroom. Not going into the courtroom for an attorney is like, well, it would be like a boxer or an MMA fighter saying, that they're a boxer or an MMA fighter, but they've only ever practiced, and they've never made it into the ring. They don't have a record. Or I've run into a few that have tried cases. I've run into more than just a few attorneys who tried one case and lost, and said that loss affected them such that they didn't want to go back into the courtroom, but they still wanted to be a plaintiff's lawyer. And those are the cases that I've seen where, and it's why I developed my opinion, those cases, just the defendants pushed those plaintiffs around, and the cases were settled for far less than what I thought was fair value, or what could have been obtained by an attorney that goes into the courtroom. So it's the most important. I think it is the most important attribute. I mean, given that all of you guys are very smart, and especially in med mal, where you understand the medicine and the law, I mean, that's another rarity. And I first came into contact with that when I broke into this business and did some cases right off the bat with Dick Noble, and started to understand how rare of an animal it was in terms of plaintiff's work that could do medical malpractice and do it right. It's another cut above. And it's a tough business. A lot of people don't know the statistics on medical malpractice cases. I mean, juries don't like to hit hospitals and doctors with verdicts, especially in small towns. We know that.
Yep.
They're afraid they're going to lose their doctors or lose their hospital. But also we grow up from an early age understanding, that we were taught anyway, that the policeman is your friend, and you can always go to the policeman if you're in trouble and he'll help you out. Of course, we got a lot of things happening in society right now that are a little bit different from that. and a lot of dispute over that. But that's the way we were brought up. And of course, you're also brought up that doctors were about as close to God, maybe even closer than priests. And I mean, they saved people's lives. So it's hard when you've been brought up in that kind of a culture to want to blame them for a bad result. But we do know now that things happen. And when they do, yeah, then somebody has got to take care of these little kids or our adult clients that have had a bad situation at a hospital or with a surgeon. So, yeah, it's going to the courtroom makes all the difference. And then when you got a medical malpractice case, you want somebody who specializes in medical malpractice and not somebody who does it just occasionally, because you really got to know.
The analogy I like to use is you don't want to go to the dentist to have your appendix out.
That's a good one.
You don't really. It's not the same. And Mark Bocci, who's a great trial lawyer, thinks medical malpractice cases are the hardest cases there are.
Yeah.
Because of, when we walk into the courtroom, the doctor's held in high esteem, and the lawyer is not.
Yeah, that's true.
And the whole process of trial is moving your credibility from here and shifting the balance between your credibility and the doctor's credibility. And it's not a personal attack. Some people like to do that way, but it's about this expected standard for what doctors should be held to. We don't accept pilots who sit in the cockpit and don't check their instruments or their landing gear or their ability to land their plane, or you don't accept that. You've got to check that stuff before you take off. And so we don't accept that kind of standard from doctors either.
Yes. And as someone who is a pilot and has a pilot's license, I can tell you that I think that's a really good analogy, because there are standards and there are procedures and there are rules, and you get into trouble when you don't follow them.
That's right. Medicine is not a science. We hear this, especially you learn this on the defense side. It's an art, but it's an overlap. It's not just an art. There are some things that are scientific. It's like when you read a lab report. Those numbers are not, they can be subject to somewhat of an interpretation, but they're either within the normal range or they're outside, and why. So and when you go to do surgery on somebody, you got to make sure you're in the right location before you start out. And there's steps to do that, to make sure you got the right patient, that you haven't mixed up the patients.
Right.
And if you don't follow those, people get hurt.
So, knowing that you've tried quite a few cases and you've won some, you've lost some, because that's going to happen. So it makes you guys so good and so dangerous. What's the worst defeat that you've ever had? And I'll ask that question, not, I guess more, you can answer it any way you want to and for any reason. I'll let you decide what the reason is that it was such a bad defeat. Maybe it was a personal, maybe it was a feeling.
I think the worst defeat was a case that we tried in 2010 in federal court. It was me and a couple of other lawyers, and it was a medical product device. It was a product liability case, and it was a device that was marketed for particular use after the FDA had denied the applications to do the marketing. A lot of people don't know this, but the FDA says how you can market a device. Doctors can use them in different ways. That's called an off-label use.
Right.
And the same is true of drugs. Sometimes drugs turn out to be better for one application than the one that they were approved for use in the first place. And that's called off-label use. And doctors are trained and educated and understand, and they can adapt products and drugs for certain uses. But the manufacturers of the drugs or the product can't try to sell it and market it unless it's been approved for that marketing. And we had a case where the manufacturers were marketing a product in a way that was illegal, against the law. It's actually a crime, and causing significant harm to people. I represented a young woman who tore her shoulder rotator cuff as a flight attendant, counter person for Southwest Airlines. And at 24 years old, she lost the use of her arm, and because of this product. And the lawyers we were up against were hacks. I mean, they brought them in from out of town, and they were just not good. And we put on a case that was hamstrung to some degree by the judge in the case, whose name I won't mention, but that case we put so much time into, and we knew that the product had been marketed illegally and was causing harm. And we were in a federal court jury, so we had eight jurors, and we had to get them all. You can't, in Oregon, you can get 9 out of 12, but in federal court, you got to get a unanimous verdict. And so we only had 8 jurors, and the jury spent about 4 hours and came back and tubed us. They essentially gave the defense a verdict. And we had so much time and effort. We consolidated 5 cases together, tried them all together. And it was really a devastating blow. It was a really difficult outcome. It ended up being reversed on appeal, but it created a cascade of unfortunate results for a lot of people. And it was really disappointing. I think the most disappointing thing was, it's easy to win cases. The first time I won a case on the defense side, I thought I was a great lawyer. But winning cases on the defense side and medical malpractice and product liability is like winning cases on the prosecutor side in criminal cases, because you almost always win. And you get this idea that it's because you're a great lawyer, when it's really the way the system is set up. And
right.
So that case was really tough to take, because not just because of the investment in time and money that we put into it, but for my client and losing to a bunch of hacks. I just hated that. I hated losing to people who are, you hate losing if you're competitive. You don't like to lose to people who are not as good as you are at whatever it is you're competing with. You hate losing to you. If you want to lose, if you're going to lose, it's going to be because somebody was better.
Yeah.
And they had better facts.
Yeah.
That was a hard loss.
In baseball, it'd be equivalent to a league game in which you got shut out 10-0 by the last place team that it only won one other game the entire year.
Yeah, that's horrible.
Feel
It's
terrible.
one thing to lose to somebody who's really good.
Right.
And I've lost to people who are really good. And that's a different feeling. Anyway, yeah.
So I think I may have had some contact with that particular device. Are we under any kind of confidentiality where we can't mention the device?
I don't think so. No, it was a pain pump in the shoulder joint.
Yep.
And we did have some success in those cases.
Yep.
But ultimately, the one we ended up trying in federal court, it set a sort of a cascade of not good cases for plaintiffs thereafter.
Yeah, I had worked on a group of 5 or 6 of those with one of those attorneys, and they were some really big value settlements until that decision. And then I had a whole nother group of cases out of Salt Lake City. And I think the values in those went way, way down after this result up here.
They did, and I worked with you on the group of cases that had resolved before this one that were in state court. That were, they resulted in some pretty significant settlements for those people. And ultimately, we appealed our case, and some of the patients settled before they went to appeal, and settled for a much smaller number than we ultimately settled ours for after we won our appeal. But it took several years, about 5 total.
Wow. Significant portion of your life in that endeavor right there.
Yeah. And so anyway.
So from there, which case has been the pinnacle of your career so far?
Well, I hate to say it, but it's a case that I didn't actually win.
Wow. Okay. So this is going to be an interesting story.
So it's a case that I'm probably, I made somewhat of a reputation for myself out of it. It was a case that I started in 2011. And I tried it to a hung jury. And hung juries are unusual. They do happen. I've had one before that, not that Dave and I worked on. Dave was the trial lawyer on it. I was just backing him up, so I don't really call it my injury, it was his. But after we settled, after we tried that case to a hung jury, we settled it because both sides realized, we don't want to go through this again. There's some merit to the case. So we settled that one. But my case, the doctor on the other side dug in his heels and said, no way. I said, okay, let's try it again. And so I went and tried it again in 2012. And this time, we thought we had a verdict. And the jury came back and said, yep, the doctor was negligent, but he didn't cause the injury, which in that case, it was death. And I asked for the,
Wait a minute. The doctor was negligent, but he didn't cause the death.
That's what the jury said.
That seems like
It's a defense verdict is what that is.
well, I mean, how do you get there as a jury where, isn't that, what do we call that, like a disconnect? I mean, how are you negligent, but you...
Usually there are 2 questions on the verdict form in a simple case. You have to prove both negligence and causation. And so in that case, the jury decided the doctor was negligent, but that the doctor's negligence didn't cause the patient's death. But that wasn't the end of it. One of the things that always happens, not always, you have to ask for it, but when a judge reads a verdict, the parties can ask for the jury to be polled. And what the judge does then is asks each of the individual jurors whether or not the verdict as read aloud represents their true verdict. And when they did that with my case, it was clear that the verdict was defective. In other words, and it's too complicated to explain here, but the result was the jury had to go back into the jury room and continue their deliberations until they reached a valid verdict. Well, they couldn't do that. They couldn't reach a valid verdict. So they ended up with a hung jury again after the second trial.
Wow. So what period of time did this transpire over?
2012, 2011, 2012.
And so then what happened after that? Did that case settle? Just
Nope.
and went away.
Nope.
What happened?
We went back for number 3.
Oh my word. You tried it again?
I tried it 3 times.
And this was all in the course of 2 years?
Yeah.
Oh man.
And so the third time,
Wow.
Guess what happened?
Defense verdict?
Hung jury.
Hung jury. 3 hung juries
3 hung juries
on the same case.
on the same case. And so at the end of the third case, I knew that I couldn't try it again. I knew that if I've tried a case 3 times and I get the same result, you know, that definition of insanity. Keep trying to do the same thing over and over again and get the same result. That's insanity. So I figured it would be insanity. Some people thought I was insanity to try it 3 times. But after the third time, I knew I couldn't try it again. But the defense decided that the law should be that if you try a case 3 times, then the defense wins. And so they decided they wanted to appeal. And I said, there's no way I am going to let the defense set a precedent that says, if you try a case 3 times, you don't get to try it a 4th time. And I won't go into the details of the law. But the defense decided they were going to appeal it. I was ready to walk away from it, to set it aside. You know, we've tried it 3 times. I cannot get a jury to see things. And the split was always, you know, you had to get 9. The first case, it was 6-6. I got 9 on negligence in the second case, and they couldn't agree on causation. And then the third case was like 8-4. And so I couldn't get one more juror, but I knew that it didn't make any sense to do it a 4th time. The case was getting stale. But the defense decided they were going to appeal it. And I said, screw that, you appeal it. I'm not dismissing it. And so we took the case to the Court of Appeals. And I won in the Court of Appeals. And all I got was the right to try it again.
Wow. But boy, you stopped what could have been a disastrous precedent.
But more than that, I wanted them to know I am not going to give up on their terms.
Good for you.
And my wife believes wholeheartedly that case has made a big difference in how defense lawyers and defense insurance companies view whether or not I'm willing to take a case to trial. I really like trial. It's fun. I don't like to always say that to my clients because it's not fun for them.
Yeah, it's pretty stressful.
You know, it's somebody who's either dead or seriously injured, and it's a tragedy for them. But the difficulty that I've had over the last 4 or 5 years since that, probably 6 years now, is actually getting cases to go to trial. And that's because so far, most of the cases that I take, and I really try to take cases that I think I'm going to win, I've been able to get them resolved because, and they pay my number. I mean, I kind of get an idea of what I think a case is worth and draw a line, and they've been paying. That's been my experience in the last 4 or 5 years. It's harder to get into the courtroom to the point where I'm actually trying to engineer a couple of cases that I have to try, just so I can try a couple more cases. Because I've got this, you can't see it from there, but I've got this stack of books over there on, that I've been reading about trying cases and all this new thinking about different ways of doing things. And I want to try out these new tools. And then I keep getting, they don't want to try them. They end up paying my number.
Well, yeah, with that kind of bulldog tenacity, trying the same case 3 times and then taking it to the Court of Appeals, I can see why. I mean, you're minimizing what I've said.
I forgot to mention that it actually went to the Court of Appeals before we even tried it the first time. And so that case has been tried 3 times and has 2 Court of Appeals decisions. And I won both the Court of Appeals decisions.
Man, that's fantastic.
And they got me nothing, except for some good law. Good law.
Well, good law, and you're probably reaping some really good professional karma with regard to some of these good cases that you're taking, because the other side obviously knows that you won't back down.
No, I don't see any reason to. I'm actually of the mind that if you can't take a case to trial, don't take it. If you can't or won't or not willing to take a case all the way through trial, then don't take it. Just don't take it, because it's hard enough in malpractice cases to get a verdict. It's hard to get them to settle when they even realize that there's such significant liability that they have to settle. I mean, I had a case one time where a guy takes his wife into the emergency room because she's having abdominal pain, and they do a CT scan, which they should have done. But when they read the CT scan, they notice that one of the blood vessels, the main blood vessels that's feeding the bowel with blood supply, is completely occluded, which is what's causing her pain. But the ER doctor doesn't read the report. He orders a CT scan and then doesn't read the report that says, hey, she's got an occluded artery. It's a medical emergency. So they put her in the hospital for 3 days while her bowel is dying. They didn't read the report.
Necrosis. And I understand from the cases I've had like that those poor people go through a lot of pain too. Incredible.
It was a horrible way to die. And, they made me take that case. I mean, they didn't make me take it to trial, but that's one of the cases this is what you're going to pay. And don't come back to me with this much or that much less. I'm going to try it, and you're going to lose. So this is what you want. If you want to not try it and lose, this is what you got to pay. And they made me go 6 weeks before trial, before they paid. But they do that. So malpractice cases are hard, and they're difficult. You've got really good lawyers on the other side, unlimited budgets for their experts. And so don't take cases that you can't win, because you're going to end up you're going to either have to dismiss them. And I can't deny that I've not done that before, where I brought a case and ended up having to dismiss it. But it's usually because they come to me late and I don't have time to evaluate them. And so that happens. But if you're not willing to take a case to trial, don't take it.
Man, that's a I'd make a great plaque on the wall, because that's a great admonition. And it fits right in with my experience and what we're all about here with this Settlement Pros podcast.
It's the only leverage we have.
That's right. And for the clients that I've had the unfortunate experience of working for, where they did not have that kind of lawyer with that kind of reputation, like I said earlier, the results have been less than satisfactory for the client, and we go away feeling really poorly too, knowing that in the hands of an attorney with good skills and a reputation, that case would have been worth double, triple, or more. So it's rough when you see a poor plaintiff who gets one chance at a settlement get run over like that. So what would you advise people to do to avoid those other attorneys that we've been casually referencing, the ones that don't go in the arena?
Well, I mean, you got to ask questions, and don't go to a malpractice lawyer who's not a malpractice lawyer. I mean, I sometimes I'll be on Google, and I see these ads pop up for lawyers. If you just Google medical malpractice, you'll get a list of lawyers, and I'll see some people on that list who I know have never tried a malpractice case. And I wonder why they are advertising themselves as malpractice lawyers. You got to find out whether somebody is really a malpractice lawyer. It's not something just anybody can do. Like I said, you don't want to go to a dentist to have your appendix out. You don't want to go to a criminal lawyer who dabbles in a little bit of personal injury on the side to do your malpractice case. You'll get what you will not get the kind of representation
right.
you need.
Or vice versa. You wouldn't want to go to a personal injury attorney that dabbles in criminal, if that's what you use, a criminal lawyer.
Nope.
So, one of the things I've told folks is I've seen those pop-ups on the web. I mean, every time I get a client and I get a chance to talk to them, at some point in the engagement or conversation, I ask them, how did you get to this attorney? So I like to hear those stories so I can understand how our clients are actually finding attorneys. And sometimes it's just serendipity, synchronicity, and good old-fashioned Irish luck that they just happen to, on the first attempt, call the right guy or gal. A lot of them get turned down and referred, or they're tenacious enough themselves that they ask for the names and they keep going and talking to attorneys. But it's amazing to me how many of our prospective plaintiffs out there will go online and Google and look for, attorney that handles medical error, medical malpractice. And what I've told some of the people that I've counseled, friends and family that have called me looking for referrals, I've coached them that they'd say, well, I've looked this guy up and wow, he's got this big firm. At least it looks big. The website's big and there's all these results of all these settlements. And they even say right on the website that they settle all their cases. They're so good at what they do, they settle all their cases. And I've told these folks, look, that's not the indicator. If they're settling all their cases and they're not talking about any trials or any verdicts or any of those kind of results, then you want to run, because you're not going to get the result that you possibly need or want or think that you should get by having an attorney like that take your case. They're going to settle it out and they're not going to get very much, and then they're going to shut the file and go on to the next one. So
right.
some of these people put their websites together and they literally say, settlement, 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 and you don't see a verdict in there. But absent any of those results, I think your advice is right on. When you talk to them, ask them, how many cases have you tried? How many have you tried in the last 5 years? How about the last 2 years? How about your entire career? Have you lost any cases? I've had people tell me that they've talked to an attorney who has said, I've never lost a case. And what that really meant was, I've never lost a case because I've never tried any.
Yeah, that's what that means.
Yeah, that's what it means.
There's no way, there's no way that you can do this work without losing cases.
Yeah.
And sometimes we lose cases that we should lose, but often we lose cases we shouldn't lose. And I think the statistics, Jack, are somewhere around 85% of cases that go to trial are won by the defense. The doctors and hospitals win. And that's maybe an old statistic, and I don't know how accurate it is now, but that, of course, is skewed a bit because the insurance companies don't let you try really good cases. Some people take the position that, no matter what, they're going to try a case. And they make a decision based more on their own ego than what's best for them and their client, And I think I take that whole thing that I learned from Judge Valeur seriously, that you represent a client, not a cause. And you have to, under our ethics rules, zealously represent a client. And that means sometimes settling a case that you might want to go try because the risk to your client for a little bit more money is not in your client's best interest. Sometimes
Right.
You don't have a choice because you're not getting the kind of, the kind of response that you think you want from a particular case, but you have to be willing to go,
Yeah. Yeah. I think you're absolutely right. And you got to look at it from the very beginning. I mean, it's akin to those of our listeners who understand or have ever been involved in a negotiation. Your power in a negotiation is the power to walk away. And if you hear stories about people who go to foreign countries and end up in bazaars, maybe negotiating for knickknacks and paddywhacks, things they may want to send home. Maybe it's a rug or whatever a piece of art that when they got to the point in the negotiation where the price just wasn't good enough and they turned and said no and started walking away is when the merchant came after them. And in your business, it's somewhat akin to that. It's not exact. I mean, there are times when we negotiate too in mediations, but you got to go into a negotiation with a walk away mindset. I'm going to walk away unless I get to a certain price or level. And I think in trial work, you've got to go in saying, I'm not going to take this case unless I know that if I have to, I can try it and I'm feeling like I can win it. So
Yep.
A bit different there, but I think there's some similarities. So, well, I got a few more questions and then we're going to wrap up, but,
Okay.
like to know a little bit about your value system.
Okay.
So, what do you believe in? Are you religious? Were you raised with any religious background?
I think I am not religious. I think I was raised with a strong sense of equity and justice. The thing that one of your questions you sent me earlier was what really motivates you, and what I really am motivated by is when I see somebody who's been taken advantage of. somebody who's been treated badly, and especially when somebody's in a vulnerable position and taken advantage of. I took a case about 3 years ago that violated all my rules about whether or not I can win it. I thought I could win it, but the problem was I knew that the doctor was probably judgment proof and had no insurance coverage. But he was so bad in terms of what he did with this client. And then when I really decided, all right, I'm going to sue him, was when I got his records, and he blamed all the problems that the client was having because of the doctor's errors on the client, on the patient. He tried to cover his own ass. I don't know if I can say this for your podcast, but
Sure you can.
he tried to cover himself by blaming the patient. And I knew, because I knew that he had been sued and he'd lost his license to practice. And I knew from some of my colleagues that he likely didn't have any coverage. But I sued him anyway because I wanted to take his deposition. And I wanted to put him under oath and make him explain himself under oath. And so that's what I did. I sued him. I took his deposition. I knew there wasn't any money there. I knew he had made a big error. There was nothing more I could do to my client. And it cost me several $1,000s because my client didn't have the money. But I did it anyway. And it was because I hate seeing people take advantage of other people. And I hate it when someone, particularly in a vulnerable position, that takes advantage of other people. Another case I took that was kind of like that, on the lines of that, was out on the coast. There was a surgeon who was taking care of my client, who ended up falling down the side of a hill and impaling her calf with a stick. She was out mushroom hunting or something, and the wound in her leg got infected. And so she had to come back to the hospital, and the hospital called the surgeon on call. And the surgeon who was on call was in the middle of a big fight with his wife. Divorce, you know. And when my client got to the emergency room, they called the surgeon, and he came in, and in the middle of the visit with the client, was on the phone yelling at his wife, ex-wife. And as soon as he hung up, the patient was there waiting for him to see, and he knew that she had to go to surgery to have this wound cleaned out. But instead of taking her to surgery, he took a pair of hemostats and jammed them into her leg without using any anesthetic.
Oh.
And the nurse who was in the room just went ballistic, and he didn't care. You know, and it didn't cause any permanent damage, but there was no reason for him to do that. And so I ended up suing the hospital and this guy, and got a little bit of money for my client. But what happened was that guy lost his job. And when I'd done some research on the guy, I saw that he was going 2 years here at this hospital, 2 years here at this hospital, 3 years here at this hospital. And because doctors get to be evaluated and disciplined in secret in Oregon and other states, you couldn't figure out why he was moving around. And this is a surgeon, you know, he's moving around from hospital to hospital. And who knows where he is now? He's in Wisconsin somewhere. But I took that case not because it was a big money case. It wasn't a big money case at all. It was a little, not even any money really. I probably didn't even take a fee, if much. I covered my costs on the case, gave all the money to my client. But that was because that guy's hurting people. and he needs to go find another job. He needs to go do something else. And that's the kind of thing that gets me going, is when somebody's taken advantage of and treated badly. And I can't always do anything. I can't always do something for those people. But if I can, I will.
Man, that's great. So kind of jumped the gun a little bit on me there, because that's one of our final 3 rounds of questions before I let you go.
Okay.
For any one of our podcast interviews. Because you're not afraid to get into the arena of the courtroom for your clients, I ask you if you're willing to step into the arena with me and go 3 rounds of tough questions. And that was one of them.
Oh, okay. Sorry.
No, that's fine. That was a really good story. But that particular question that you answered there was the middle one, which was of your core values or principles, which do you feel strongly enough to literally stand up and fight for? And you answered it. People that have been taken advantage of. And we see some of that. So the other questions are, what are you most appreciative of in your life right now?
I'm every day happy that I'm here for my family. My kids, who are now 13 and 10, and my wife are really what it's about for me. And I think that for a lot of people. I mean, when I look back on my life, I want to be able to say that I was a good husband and a good father and a good lawyer, in that order. But I'm thankful that I'm here for my family, that I can be there to, help them learn things, my kids, and take care of them. That's the most important thing for me. And I've had some experiences that make that a little bit more poignant, but
oh yeah.
So yeah.
So that fits right in with the very last question of the day. If your career as a trial lawyer was to be condensed into one sentence when it's all over, what would that one sentence say?
I think it would say something like, he was a fighter. And I've never been one that's afraid. And that's where you have to, and sometimes it can get me in trouble, because I'm not afraid to stand up. And I'm not a big guy. And some people might think that's Napoleon syndrome, but it's really not that. I just don't like to have anybody taken advantage of. And even when kids were the same size, and I wasn't afraid to stand up. And I'm not afraid somebody to hit me in the mouth either. So I think at the end of the day, I think I would want people to say that he was a fighter and stood up for what was right.
Yeah, that's great. So tenacious and pugnacious.
Yep.
He was a fighter, Rob Beatty-Walters. So, Rob, I pronounce you a true settlement pro, and congrats on making it through the podcast. I understand that if people want to connect with you, you've got a website, and of course, I'm sure a phone number on there, and we'll be publishing that information underneath this video when we put that up online, and we'll also have that information available for you listeners of the podcast, simply by going back out and looking it up either in our iTunes platform or Spotify or one of the other platforms that you're consuming this podcast off of. So, Rob, from me and all of us out there, and I'm sure you've heard this from your clients, but not only thanks for taking the time and to do the podcast today, but also thanks for being a tough fighter for the rights of injury victims.
My pleasure.
That's it for today. This has been Jack Meligan. See you all, everybody. Bye-bye.